If you're upset and angry for a decade, you're beautiful and wonderful, and that's your journey, If you figure it out in a year, like, God bless you, please teach me your ways. Like
Hello and welcome to Self Talk. I'm your host, Rachel Astarte. Today, my guest is Noëlle Janka. She is a politicized coach for social change leaders and author of Rebel Healing, Transforming Ourselves and the Systems That Make Us Sick. She has lived with health challenges for more than 20 years and has supported clients with their healing and career development for more than a decade via transformational workshops, writing salons, coaching groups, yoga instruction, and individual coaching. Noëlle, thank you so much for being on Self Talk.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm psyched to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive in. I wonder if you could start by helping the listeners understand how you came into the field that you came into. What's your background and not necessarily your academic background, but what drove you to do what you do?
Yeah, great question. I'm somebody who, in my younger years, couldn't really figure out what the right thing was. I started out doing grassroots organizing work, mostly around the environment, but also worked on some political campaigns, and then did some work on education around the Middle East. That's what my dad did. So I wanted to he told me not to do it, but I had to check it out for myself. And then I went through this cycle of continuing to get a job that I loved and get sick, and get a job that I loved and get sick. I also had a job that I loved in an energy efficiency company and did that for a while, and then was too sick and had to leave. And so when I turned 30, I took a little break. I was living with my family to try to recover a little bit. And I decided to invest in a coach for myself, because I was like, there's got to be a way to do good work in the world and not get sick, but I don't know how to figure it out by myself. And I found this coach who had been a climate organizer. And I thought, okay, he's my people. If somebody can help me, maybe it's this person. His name is Jeremy Blanchard. We're still very close. And just a few sessions and I totally fell in love with it. And I thought, this is something that I could do, because I needed something that was very flexible. I needed something where I could try to make more money in less time. And coaching, for better or worse, is totally unregulated industry, so you can charge whatever you want. So that was 8 years ago, and I started working with leaders in the social change space, social impact leaders, and folks with health challenges, and that's kind of led me to where I am today.
Yeah. So do you specifically work with social change activists or professionals, or do
yes.
you? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what a great niche that is too, because there are a lot of issues that come up emotionally as well. But then how does your experience with, and maybe this is leading us into talking about the book a bit, your experience with illness and how it was preventing you from doing the things that you love. How did you break that cycle, or did you?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my mentors, when I was learning to be a coach, she was also kind of helping me through my own healing process. And she's like, I know that a lot of what you're coaching people on is getting themselves out of their own way so that they can do the things they want to do. But in your case, there's still a lot of things you need to stop doing so that you can do the things you want to do. So in my case, I just have this, I'm just driven to a fault, Capricorn, Sun, 3 on the Enneagram, just
I hear it. Yep. Very driven.
Just doing, pushing. And I was sort of for many years was like, I'm sick, but I'm not going to let it stop me. I'm still going to do all the things I want to do. And I would just, I was burning myself out over and over. So learning how to rest, learning how to find community while I was resting, learning how to ask for help, those are all things that I had to figure out, both as a human and a business owner and a friend, and and just to kind of survive in the world. And I think the biggest thing that I learned in my own healing journey is how to be with this experience of being in a body that doesn't work like other bodies without suffering. I think that's kind of been the biggest shift in my life and in my experience, and something that I help clients with. And that's really what I wanted to offer in the book too, is that we can be sick, we can be ill, we can be disabled, and still have really joyous, full, incredible lives.
Yeah, it's so it almost lends itself to this idea that being ill becomes part of who you are, right? And so is it specifically people with chronic illness that you're talking about in this book, or is it anybody who's going through something that that could get healed or might not, but they're in a unhealthy place right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I wrote it with folks with chronic illness in mind, but also I'm in this little umbrella of chronic illnesses that I think for the most part are chronic only because we haven't, quote unquote, modern medicine hasn't figured out how to cure them yet. So there's a lot of us that we get better and we get sick again, we get better and we get sick again. But what I found, which I think is really fun, is that people that don't have chronic illness, or people who have injuries, or people who have mental illness, are also getting a lot out of the book. So I think when I think about healing, like my definition of healing is it's maybe like 30% about repair and 70% about transformation. And I think about that personally and collectively. So I think there's a lot in the transformation part that folks are resonating with.
Yeah. Let's talk about that, since you just beautifully segued into the transformation part. So what is transforming about whether it's chronic illness or it's a long time or long-term illness that might get healed down the line? And by the way, I want to also comment before we skip too far ahead. I hear what you're saying about Western medicine and how in many ways it keeps us sick, which is part of the deal, right? Getting looped into medications or procedures that aren't necessarily necessary. And so talk a little bit, if you would, about how that transformation works, or what that transformation can be when we're suffering. And to be fair, it can be very frightening, right? This body that you've relied on up until the point you got sick isn't functioning for you anymore the way that you're used to. And that can be really disorienting. So how do you come back from that? Maybe it's a big question. You can break it down. How do you come back and redefine your relationship with this body? Hi, it's Rachel here. If you'd like to dive deeper into your own self-development, but you're looking for an alternative to traditional talk therapy, I think you'll love the Foundation of Self Immersion program. For a full year, you'll get dynamic coursework you can complete on your own time, plus weekly coaching calls and monthly one-on-one sessions with me for personal support. Visit foundationofself.com and click on the events page for more information. That's foundationofself.com. Now, back to the episode.
Yeah. I love that question. Thank you so much, Rachel. It's interesting that you used the term come back, but then also said redefine your relationship, because I do think that it's in the redefinition where the magic happens. Because I think, so for folks who acquire chronic illness, for differentiating from people that are born with chronic illness or disability, it is a really disorienting process, and it involves fear, anger, upset. I think that's all important. Those are all important stages to go through. And I think one of the places that we eventually get to, if someone is committed to their healing, and by healing I mean the transformation part, is surrender. Right. And I think it's one of the hardest parts of a healing journey is
sure.
surrendering to what is. And everybody's on a different timeline. So for folks who are listening, I want to normalize that, like if you're upset and angry for a decade, you're beautiful and wonderful. And that's your journey. If you figure it out in a year, like, God bless you, please teach me your ways. Like, it's really different for everyone. But I think part of what we have to surrender to is that we can't go back. We can't go back to the way things were.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about that again on a personal and a collective level, because the way things were those were the conditions that created our illness. Mm-hmm. And that could be conditions that were within your control, like you got sick because you were working too much or eating poorly or whatever. But those conditions could also be environmental, or people in your family died, or something tragic happened, or some combination of all of those things. Right. And so we sometimes are just like, I hear folks say a lot, like, I just want to be normal. I just want to feel the way that I felt before. And I think that is, we can get really stuck there, because that's not actually what we need. What we need is to go somewhere different. Mm-hmm. And that's really frightening and scary in itself. Talk about fear.
Sure. It's like, taking off on a journey and you have no idea where you're going, but you have to go somewhere other than here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just so the idea of going back, maybe that was my error to what was in my mind was maybe not what came out of my mouth. Going back to trust in your body, mm-hmm. going back to trust in your life, and a sense of self-agency that you had before you were ill. Mm-hmm. Is there a way back? And what I'm hearing you say is it's going to be different, but mm-hmm. but that self-trust, which you talk about, the intuition is a big part of it.
Yeah.
Being able to listen to your body and what it needs. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
yeah, I think for some people it's going back to that. You're so right. And I think for some people it's finding it for the first time.
Good point. Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. So in a way, not to put a shiny polish on it, but illness is a way to a different level of awakening for a lot of people. Yeah,
I think so. I think it's a portal for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's what they say in shamanism, right? Sometimes to be initiated into shamanism, you have to go through a life-threatening illness to really awaken yourself to what is possible and to shed some of what wasn't working. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that, about healing. You talk about 3 elements of healing, mm-hmm. right? And we just talked about them a little bit, but you discuss intuition, mm-hmm. connection, and context. Could you talk about those a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. So I think, there's so much that goes into healing, and there's so many, incredible healers out there and books and things. But I think those are sort of 3 elements that are often missing from the conversation about healing, and not just healing from chronic illness, but healing more broadly. But especially in chronic illness, there's so many books that are like, if you just eat the right things and meditate enough and do your yoga, you're going to get better. And then there's so many of us who are like, I did all the things and I'm still sick. What's wrong? So that's part of why I wanted to highlight these in the book. And so in terms of context, I really wanted people to understand that they weren't alone, and that their illness was not their fault. Not that they had zero agency in it. Like, I think we actually, we do have agency in getting ill and getting better, or getting healing. But more than 60% of Americans have at least one chronic condition. Mm. So when people find themselves with a chronic illness and feel really isolated, it's important for people to understand that, like, you're actually in really good company. There's a lot of us. And also that we are living in a society that from its very inception has not privileged life, right? Like, our society was built on genocide and slavery and profit, and that continues to live on in all of our systems and institutions, or we'll say most, including our medical system, which, you know, there's also eugenics baked into our medical system. There's so much. And so I just think it's important for us to remember that we are trying to heal inside of a system that isn't actually interested in our well-being. And so in order for us to heal, we have to be non-normative. That's where the title of the book comes from, Rebel Healing. We have to be rebellious. And where the connection piece comes in is that our society is also has become so individualistic. And I think that we can probably trace every single one of our social challenges as a society back to a lack of connection. And I think part of what makes the experience of chronic illness so challenging is this kind of feeling of isolation. People who who are bedbound or housebound, or just otherwise feel like left out of a lot of what's going on. And so a lot of what I talk about in the book is, even if we are bedbound or housebound or otherwise isolated, how can we find people? How can we reconnect? How can we find each other? How can we find other people who share our experience? I think that's really, really huge. And the intuition piece is, I really have found in my own experience and working with clients on cultivating their intuition for 8 years now, that that is how we can heal ourselves, by building a relationship with our intuition, strengthening that relationship, learning to trust what comes up. Our bodies will tell us what we need. Yeah. And I know, you know, this, which is, you know, so great for everyone that works with you. And, but just trying to spread the gospel a little wider, because, I think it's also so simple, you know, like once folks can listen and hear and trust and consult their intuition on a regular basis, like everything becomes so much easier. Not just healing, but like, you know, figuring out when you want to go to the grocery store and what you should have for dinner, and like how to support your kid. Like all of that becomes so much easier when you have access to your intuition. Yeah.
And it's a resource that's right there all the time, you know. And but you raised a really excellent point, which is this individualistic society versus community building, village making, all of that, and how important community or connection is for healing. Right. So, and the point that came up for me is, and I know you've spoken about this before, and we hear it so often, this idea that we have to do it all. This idea that it's my body, it's my illness, right? It's my responsibility to take care of this by myself. I don't want to burden anybody else with my stuff. Right. And I understand that. Okay. So I'm a Virgo, so I'm all about like, you know, like get her done. And do not create waves. So what would you tell someone who is in that place where like I don't want to have to talk about how much fear I have or pain I'm in. I'm just bitching all the time. How can I create community without being, you know, a broken record in a way?
Great question. I do think that finding spaces to bitch are important, especially with people who really get it. Like, I'll share a little story. I have a 3-way text thread with 2 friends who also have lived with chronic Lyme disease and other health challenges, and we're always kind of cheering each other on and bitching together. And I reached out recently because of a medical billing issue. You know, like someone didn't do their job right, and that's fine, but it's going to cost me hundreds of dollars if my health insurance doesn't eventually figure it out. Anyway, my friends were like, I hereby grant you, on behalf of all people with chronic illness, permission to be 15% Karen next time you call the insurance company, and just be aggressive. And it just made me laugh so hard, you know, and I treasure those relationships so much. And it's surprising to me how many people I meet who have had chronic illness for years who don't have chronic illness buddies. And I'm kind of like, dude, what are you doing? no wonder life sucks for you right now. Like, you got to find people, you got to find your people. And I think that is possible. You can find people, through online support groups or, Facebook pages. I mean, we're everywhere, us folks with chronic illness are everywhere. So I think that's really important, is to find your people, find places to bitch, but also find places where you can be supported. Because there are so many people who don't get it. And ableism is a big problem. I mean, there's people who don't even know the term ableism. And
Wow.
I don't blame them for that. I think that's a societal failing on our part. But, that feeling of like, I don't even want to talk about it. I don't want to be a burden. That's just ableism. That's just another function of the system that doesn't privilege our well-being. And so I'm just always encouraging folks to find the folks that do get it, so that you can feel more emboldened, more sane, more like you're not alone. And then that can help you have courage to share your experience in other spaces. Because I do think that all of us not sharing our truth is a missed opportunity too, because there's so many of us who are sort of in the closet with our health challenges. And when we can find each other and be open about it, some really beautiful things can happen.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's what it's really about, is finding the right people, right?
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to say, I'm going to join a meetup group for long COVID. And then they're all a bunch of assholes. So what do I do? You know what I'm saying? So it's like,
that can happen too. Yeah.
Right. So how do I find my people? You know what I mean? So that, I think, to me, it sounds like it would be a bit of trial and error, but I could also see, having organized communities myself, sometimes just by having that shared experience makes it a little easier to go deeper quicker. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So I'm actually saying this for the listeners who are like the yeah buts. I always hear the yeah buts when I'm talking about, yeah, but I can't find my people. Right. So
yeah. Well, and I think this is a place where people can use their intuition, their powers of manifestation too, is be really clear on who you're looking for and tell people who you're looking for, and trust that they'll show up. I think, but part of the trial and error thing, you're like, okay, not that group. So who am I looking for? And then, putting that out there, asking your intuition, how do I find these people? I think that can be useful in the process too.
Yeah. So don't get discouraged, right? Keep going and keep trying. Yeah. So let's talk about the shadowy underbelly of this wonderful work that you're talking about. And this comes up a lot. And the reason I'm asking about it is because I think we need to talk about it too, to really cover all the bases. There is also victim mentality, right? There's a sense that I'm sick and that has become my identity. And I'm not even I'm going to expect people to treat me differently. And I want to be honored for my pain, right? So how does that differ from the surrender and the growth of knowing that you have a chronic illness and still trying to, or stepping on the path of redefining who you are with a chronic illness, as opposed to slipping into that woe is me mentality? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I do think that it's probably part of the process for everyone. Like, I think I'll be so impressed to hear from people who are like, I never did it. I've never felt like a victim. Because in a way, I think we are, and so I think part of it is saying, like, yes, like, I have been harmed and I am willing to use my power to change this. And I'm willing to pull my people in, and I'm willing to find my own support structure and my own medical team and, whatever is needed. So I guess I just want to normalize, like, yeah, victim mentality is not a good place to stay, but I do think it is a place that we all visit, or sometimes visit and then crawl out of, and then fall back into, and then crawl out of. And I think it's just really important, again, to have your people, to have your supports, to have, mentors of any kind who can say, I think you've slipped back in, or I think, you're in victim mentality again. Like, I know I've pulled in so much support from different people over the years who've pulled me out of that place. So, and also I'll put in a quick plug for brain retraining programs like Primal Trust or the dynamic neural retraining system for folks who are really stuck in that rut. That can really help people get out, because the process of resetting your limbic system requires you to get out of that space for at least 6 months. And so that can really make it easier to get out of there and stay out of there in the future.
Yeah. And I think you made a really important distinction. Victim mentality as identity versus having a bad moment when you're and you feel like, why has this happened to me? And I'm sad and I feel crushed, and that's human to have those feelings. That's the difference, is not staying in that headspace. Because what you described did not sound like victim mentality to me. Finding your right medical team, finding your people, getting the care that you need. To me, victim mentality is I'm staying here, right? As you said, don't stay in that place. But of course, you're going to have those feelings, Yeah.
And I think that the isolation breeds staying in victim mentality. So that's another reason why I'm just like, community.
yeah, for sure. 100%.
Because your people won't let you stay there also.
That's right. That's right. And they also understand it because they've been there likely themselves. Right. So let's talk a little bit about the root cause that you discuss in the book between, rebel healing itself and what that actually means, the personal and the collective issues, and how they interplay. Yeah.
Sure.
Let's talk about that for a sec.
Yeah. So that was something I had kind of had written a whole other book, and then I became obsessed with this idea of the root cause. Because, I'm trained as a grassroots organizer, and when you're organizing a campaign or you're trying to write policy, you're always trying to be as strategic as possible. Like, what is the most strategic way to solve this problem? And I was going to the doctor, year after year, trying to get support to solve my problem. And they didn't want to go to the root cause. They just wanted to address the symptoms. And then I was, being somebody who's interested in politics and systems and this kind of thing, I would see the same thing in our public policy, in, efforts that were happening in my community. There were lots of policies to address symptoms, like people being unhoused, drug addiction, that kind of thing, but nothing that was really getting to the root causes of the problem. And I was sort of like, there's a connection here and I don't know what it is. And I think, I could talk about it a bunch of different ways. And I had mentioned, the genocide, slavery, profit over life piece before, but I think if you really boil it all the way down, and I think we're seeing this, unfortunately, play out all over the world in current events right now. I mean, I think the root is trauma. It's all of us, playing out our trauma on each other in our systems.
Yeah.
And I wanted to say that too, in terms of like, how do we get out of and stay out of victim mentality? I mean, some of that just is trauma healing, is being committed to healing our trauma. And I think that's where being willing to do our healing work becomes a contribution, not just to us, but to our families and our communities and the people around us. Because, I'm sure we've all heard the phrase, hurt people hurt people.
Yeah.
And by willing to not be those people anymore, that is going to actually create the possibility for us to shift on a personal and a collective level.
100%. Yeah. And I want to stress that point is the way that I put it in the same vein is a community is only as healthy as the individuals that comprise it. So we owe humanity the blessing of our own healing. And the more people do that, and we're not propagating this hurt cycle of trauma, intergenerational trauma, and collective trauma that occurs as a result of that. So what I love to end on when I get with this is, listen to how powerful you all are, right? Like just you doing your work makes a huge difference to the collective.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Noëlle's book, Rebel Healing, is available on Amazon or wherever you find books. You can also find it on her website, noellejanka.com/Rebel Healing. She is also available to connect with on Instagram at Noëlle Janka, LinkedIn, YouTube, and I will have all of her links in the show notes. So please take a look at those. It was a pleasure having Noëlle on Self Talk. Hi, this is Rachel Astarte from the Self Talk podcast. I'd love for you to send me your emails with questions or stories about yourself. What are you looking for? What are your questions? What are you grappling with in your own personal life that has to do with your identity, with yourself, with your very existence? These are the things that we're going to talk about during the podcast. And go ahead. It's all right. Get deep. I can handle it. So send them to Rachel@selftalkpodcast.com. And I'll see you on the next episode.